And you can sit or stand, it's up to you. Greetings, everybody, to the speaker series of the Algorithmic Bias Project. And this week, we are listening to a talk by Dr. Bertram from the Department of History called Unplugging Hitler's Radio. So, Dr. Bertram, it's on to you.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I always love to meet new people at University of Toronto, especially people that are interested in collaborating and talking about AI from interdisciplinary perspectives. So yes, I'm a historian, and I come to a bit of a well-worn topic, the history of disinformation, as a historian. And I'm going to show you today what I've learned about an algorithmic kind of anti-disinformation project that I've been working on for a couple of years. And I think some of the gifts that history generally can offer interdisciplinary conversation. So I'm here at the history department. I'm also a faculty fellow at SRI, and I run a small AI and humanities lab on translating historical insight into policy decisions in AI today. And my focus is on disinformation and new technologies and innovation. And as a historian, my training is actually in the 19th century, the history of the robber barons, the history of the growth of colonialism and mega monopolies. And so I kind of, use those insights today to sort of understand our challenges. The question that I ask of our age is, how do we make good information go viral? How do we incentivize good action? And as a historian, that's kind of a complicated question. Technically speaking, I look at data packaging for video-based algorithms. So optimizing content so that it can perform much better online. A lot of academic content is really text-based, doesn't get a lot of eyeballs on it, but there's ways that we can translate and package our content for big reach. And this is, I think, a really exciting challenge. So the way that I learned, or how I learned to do this, was by running an open, larger scale online history classroom for sex workers, who I teach the history of sex work here at the University of Toronto. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't an extractive course. I wanted to make sure that it gave something back to the community and something they wanted and asked for and could use. And often that was just historical contextual information about challenges they face today. So the history of discriminatory legislation, the history of police violence, the history of, how did this particular kind of economic trick work in the 1890s in terms of sex workers planning for retirement and stuff. So really, making sure the archives were open and the classroom was open for everyone. And that's where I learned about data packaging and how you can blow up content. And I got about over 50 million views on that classroom content. So there is a lot that we can do at the university to open up our doors much, much wider using new tools. So today I'm going to speak briefly about three things. Number one is the historical precedents behind our time. I'm going to focus on Nazi disinformation and warfare disinformation warfare here in North America. It's a lesser known topic, and often, I think it's a clear example. Sometimes I struggle in interdisciplinary conversations with historians. We get to the weeds, but then when you pull out Hitler, it's everybody's okay, I understand. And what I found this interesting case of these people that banded together to basically sabotage these disinformation campaigns that Hitler had tried to establish in North America. Then I'll be talking about the idea of the silent atomic bomb. So the impact of the assault on our communication systems in the past 10 years with a focus on social media platforms, privately owned ones. We're going to look at what do modern algorithmic bias acceleration campaigns look like compared to the historical precedents. And then what do we do? So how can we use old perspectives, old stories, old techniques in new ways to scale up algorithmic knowledge mobilization and to reframe anti-bias campaigns as national security significance. So in 2023, our colleague Jeffrey Hinton, the acclaimed AI scholar, identified 6 existential challenges that AI poses to our age. And I don't know if he's adapted this list, but this is the one I got in 2023, and it's really worked. So I'm going to work with this one today. And 50% of what he identified has to do with social media disinformation. So there's a lot of panic and a lot of concern, of course, about like, sort of all of these threats like Skynet or whatever. And I think that they're a distraction from the real threat in front of us, which is the unhinged impact that this media and these tools have been having on our societies. So those three existential challenges are polarization, disinformation, and military applications. And what I appreciated about his talk at this time was that he saw polarization as an existential crisis, not as like a nice to fix, like fluffy, like feel good problem, but that literally, if you want to destroy a society, that's what you do. You blow it apart using its existing divisions. It's the easiest way to destroy something. So I'm going to teach you about how people in the Second World War saw this. And I'm pulling here from the work of Thomas Rid, who publishes on disinformation. And he argues that surviving our age of organized professional disinformation requires a return to history. His work is very rooted in the American context and doesn't really, I think, push into the broader global application of those techniques in other countries. But I think that foundationally, literacy on professional disinformation for everyone is a good thing right now. So misinformation and disinformation obviously are actually two different things. They're described often interchangeably. Misinformation just means mistakes, like erroneous, like not deliberately incorrect. So that's just, people that are accidentally saying something wrong they didn't know. And disinformation is an intentional, professional, organized attempt to undermine the integrity of society by sowing division through deliberately manipulative content. I first encountered this kind of content in an unusual research project. I found this really hugely active Hungarian ladies needlepoint group who was, burning it up in the 1930s and holding all these craft shows and, kind of like little celebrities in Canada. And as I dug a little bit deeper, I discovered that they were actually a professional political campaign that had been organized by the Horthy government in Hungary to sell revisions to the Treaty of Trianon. So they were a political, they were a little propaganda machine, but disguised in doilies and embroidery. And they were stitching their campaign into these craft shows. They'd be talking to people, and then they'd show them a piece of embroidery about a territory that Hungary had lost after the First World War. And they're like, this is actually part of Hungary, and it's how they told their story. They used the media of their day. So these kinds of techniques can work across any kind of media: radio, film, social media, and even needlepoint. And this is what Rid and other scholars refer to as active measures, which is a form of political warfare targeting a diverse range of actors and influencers. And they focus on a broad range of influence activities. So it's really anything. This is why we see, this so much in the influence economy, including covert media placement, forgery, agents of influence, friendship societies, front organizations, and more. And active measures targets real pre-existing fractures and tendencies in an opponent's society to attack it from within. So whatever they find and blow up within a society, intentionally, is a pre-existing tension or a structure. So here in Canada, a lot of the residential school denialism, this is classic active measures, right? If you go into these suspiciously well-funded media campaigns, it's why is someone investing so much money into this? Who is paying for this great comms job? Those are important questions when you think about the history of active measures. So what did active measures look like in the Second World War in North America? We know that Hitler was very interested in promoting pro-German, pro-Third Reich sentiment amongst the massive German North American population that was here. So German language speaking, not all necessarily from Germany itself. And as Harry Waldman discusses further in his work, he used a range of different techniques or a range of different approaches, or the Third Reich did. It wasn't just propaganda films. And this is where I think we've really read the Second World War incorrectly sometimes. we've often categorized stuff in terms of like propaganda or not propaganda, and then missed the whole active measures, anti-active measures piece sometimes. So these could be things like, overt political speeches maybe, but a lot of what they were circulating was like the TikTok version of the 1930s. It was musicals, it was rom-coms, it was unserious content that could fly under the radar, stuff that, censors aren't going to take a serious look at. And as you can see from this stat, nearly 500 German films shown in the United States between 1933 and 1942. Germany became the largest importer of foreign films, or exporter to the United States of foreign language films. So this is a massive amount of energy. And it was working. Like there was a kind of like a huge amount of German Americans that bought into this, non-German Americans, white Americans that bought into this. And it was really innocuous, like disinformation is today. It was doing things like talking about economics, talking about like, summer vacation or whatever. And they just really laced it in until people started getting into that silo, right? Into the silo of extremism. So what I discovered when I was working on my dissertation actually was this group of, it was actually Icelanders at the time, who I'm Icelandic on my mom's side, and I was writing this book about Icelandic migration. And it's so funny, they discovered these kinds of polarization campaigns, and they discovered that there was like all of this dissent and like these problems within Canadian society in terms of, people maybe tilting towards Hitler, that WASP Canadian society was a little too Hitler-esque, right? It's difficult to sell a society on a war against racism if the society is so racist. So they started to treat bias and anti-immigrant sentiment and racism as a national security issue. And the Board of Wartime Information and the National Film Board together began to produce anti-polarization content. This is actually one of the American versions. This is something that extends into the United States, where they decided to produce films like this one, Don't Be a Sucker by the US War Department, that treated white supremacy as a security threat. So understanding that this was a pre-existing weakness within North American society that was being used to attack it from within.
So that was 47.
Yeah, this is actually, it was produced, I believe, during the war. Wow. Production began during the war and came out in 47. So between 1940 and 1945, Canadian and American wartime film producers began to develop these anti-polarization wartime films. So these look a lot like active measures in a way. They're like the response. And again, a lot of needlepoint. So it would be things like, like cultural dances, or explaining why people ate different kinds of food. It was a very, very basic proto kind of multiculturalism, but it signaled this profound shift within Canadian society. And the NFB pours a ton of cash into this, and that's how we kind of know that, what wartime government is spending money on like pierogi films. Like they're doing something here. You got to follow the money. So these kinds of campaigns actually have legs, and they have a longer impact. So what this anti-polarization content does is it focuses on fostering community and trying to like deal with entrenched racism in WASP Canadian society. So they try to promote things like friendship and togetherness, and it sounds really simplistic, but a lot of this is just like dealing with this underlying threat. Now, this is not to oversell these early anti-polarization campaigns during the Second World War, because this is also, of course, the time of Japanese internment, right? And so they're also producing racist content for the war and for internment. But in other ways, they were also breaking new ground in terms of promoting new kind of appreciation for South Asian Canadians, for Chinese Canadians. So it's not like this is a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination, but what they saw in power, what they saw in togetherness and anti-polarization was actually like power and mutual protection. So as I said, these campaigns have a surprising legacy. They haven't really been studied in great detail, but what happens after the Second World War is both the critiques of, Hitler, the revelations of what happened during the Second World War, these certainly do affect how Canadians think, but they've already kind of been in this world where like they treat bias and polarization as a threat, as a national security threat. So this is part of, I believe, this eventually helps to evolve into new critiques of Canadian society and racism in Canadian society, including new pushback against the anti-Chinese bans on migration from the 1920s, as well as new fresh attacks on the Indian Act, which was the part of the Canadian government's architecture for imposing basically segregation and second-class citizenship on First Nations. So in the 1950s, the Canadian public has this new literacy, and it's just like part of what helps to tilt the scales here in Canada. So is there a version of active measures happening in North America today? Absolutely, absolutely. This is what Thomas Ridd argues. There's been a lot of scholars that have published on this. People have identified existing real weaknesses and tendencies within North American society, and they're blowing them up for strategic gain. The problem is that they have algorithmic tools, which are much more powerful than a radio or a movie theater, right? They're faster, higher volume. It's just an unparalleled comparison. So this is an example of one of these campaigns that actually produced in the United States. It's a group that poses as local groups. So they have chapters all throughout, Canada. So there's like in Kitchener, if you live in Kitchener, it's like, oh boy, did you see the snow in Kitchener last night? They're like, look at my dog at this like famous Kitchener thing. So it's really like community looking, again, like activities of influence, and then just layering in like little subtle things about politics, like, did you see this funny thing about like, like Trudeau is a classic example, like Trudeau is such a jerk or something. And you just see these slight tilts. And with algorithmic tools, what you can do is you can continue to scale that, right? So the power of the tool is much greater. So here we see Alberta separatist action being funded through the United States, including, just depictions of Alberta separatism as being something that's organic and extremely popular. This is the company that produces the campaign. It's called ZLR, and they basically focus on targeting Gen Z. They use a lot of stuff on TikTok. And again, it's like you wouldn't when you look at these, like I found out that I'm following some of these, because it's just like, yeah, I want that recipe, click. So it's all about, again, just getting in to the society and then slowly picking away at those existing divides. So what can we do about that? There's tons you can do about it, but the companies that run these platforms have basically like suspended operations on detecting and preventing this, in part because they make them a lot of money, right? That kind of concentrated engagement, professional engagement, that generates a lot of revenue. What they could do is what they did in 2020 after the invasion of Ukraine, which was basically go in and just show you, okay, this is coming from this country. This, this recipe site you've been following, yeah, guess where it's coming from. So that is easy to do. That's a company policy decision, right? And the companies can opt not to do it. And there's no law in Canada currently that compels them to do it. So this is really a problem with foreign monopolies controlling Canadian communication systems. And this one here, this was a huge one. It was just basically like an influencer company, and they had a bunch of different stuff from across the political spectrum. So a lot of people associate this with the targeting of the right, when in fact they target everybody across the board. They target undecided voters, they target senior citizens, they target children, they target everyone, right? Because the more kind of, the bigger your reach, the more power you have. This one here you can see in 2020, it was actually funding a a whole content production site and account focused on American media news. And it was ranked top 10 in all of the accounts on Instagram. And if you can see at the bottom, number 15 is CNN, right? So this is like a heavy duty content provider, and they're just flying in under the radar, just planting those seeds. So this is, again, classic active measures, and there's absolutely tons you can do about it. And it's a policy decision. Again, they work both on the left and the right. Here are some other examples. In the Now was more of like a socially progressive, like fun political site for the left. And you can see here, like suddenly it popped up as having this label. And then this is one from American Conservatives, a really, really big one. And it's not always an American Conservative accounts are from, a different country. It's that they've learned how to do it from different countries, right? So this is a whole industry now. It's huge. And a lot of content farms that are like producing just like general content, this is how they make money as well. So it's financially incentivized to actually allow this to happen. So what can universities do? Well, I will note that PragerU poses as a university and is not, right? So this is actually how much like social media users want access to university grade content. They want to be in those university classrooms. And I can speak for the people that I served running the classroom that I did. Nobody out there is like, give me the bad information. I don't deserve anything better. Nobody says that, right? Everybody wants the best information. They want accurate information. And so with universities staying away from these forums and only using them to promote like tuition, like free, like tuition, grants or like enrollment deadlines, that's a big, serious missed opportunity. Another is, we need to think really critically about the difference between digital frameworks, the digital frameworks that we've been living with. So just like the internet, websites, emails, like non-algorithmic or just like basic algorithmic technologies, and how algorithmic technologies are transforming communications online. And I mean, now at like a speed we've never seen before. So we have to think more about like, I can't just be on the internet. I need to be on algorithmic platforms. I need to be on TikTok. I need to be on Instagram. I need to be on Blue Sky. We have to think really critically about, how do we serve people where they are as citizens, as people that are entitled to, information about, history, information about like urban planning or whatever. Algorithmic frameworks, so there as much opportunity as there is, there's almost a lot of more of a threat, including mass data collection, unparalleled targeting. So it's easy, like we could sit here right now and set up like a Saskatchewan separatist campaign right now and get 20,000 views in 1 week and like scale. Like if we had the money, you can do it, right? There's nothing to stop you from doing it, and there's no laws against it. So how do universities defend? It's important to take action now because AI is just making this situation much, much worse, right? So it's the inaction is it's very problematic. So what does it look like? So it's really great. You can involve students, you can involve archivists, rare book librarians, community members. It's fantastic. These are dream partnerships, I think, for a lot of academics. It's what a lot of us entered academia to do, is to like give back to communities. So this campaign, as you can see, like I can, once you kind of get used to it, you can just start to produce content that, reaches like 500,000 people in maybe like a week. And that's just one piece of content, one piece of micro content. You can do collaborations with people. You can do all kinds of fun stuff. And what's really meaningful about this is like, if you have someone who's in trouble and say they're going like they have a court date or something, and they need information about, say they've been charged with like a vagrancy related offense. Like the gift of being able to give someone or their lawyer just that little bit of information about like, where exactly do vagrancy related offenses come from in this city? These are the ancestors, or these are the descendants of segregation laws. To give someone just like that back, to feel like they're not being gaslit in modern society, I think is really meaningful. It also acknowledges the true history of technology, right? Not the history of Silicon Valley. So the earliest like entrepreneurs, predominantly like a lot of sex workers were involved. This is Asia Carrera. She was one of them. She's a card-carrying member of Mensa. She's a certified genius. And she said that when she was setting up her whole online site, that she'd go around to different men and be like, how would you set up like doing a cash transaction on the early internet? And they're like, you can't do it. So she just bought herself a bunch of coding textbooks. She's like, I'm going to do it. And she like built her own early e-commerce platform, right? What happens with Silicon Valley is really different, right? And I think we see an acceleration of historic concentrations of capital, venture capital, extractive kind of colonial perspectives that don't reflect the beauty and the reality of the early internet and the possibility. So this is an example of just like one little piece of data mobilization. Usually I do like moving images. So this one's from about 4 years ago, and it was just when the anti-trans sentiment was really getting quite strong. And so I was like, I knew of like a bunch of photographs of early people we would call transgender. It's like, I can just pop that up. I can pop that up, take me maybe an hour to format it, and just give people, it's like, no, that's not true. Transgenderness is not a modern invention. Here's just one person. Her name was Geraldine, and her mom supported her and sewed her dresses, right? And that kind of stuff is really important for people. So are we serving that? Are we delivering that as academics today? I think we're stuck in like an older system. So Farhad Razak, who's over at the medical school, he was talking about a year ago about the number of years that he sees between research publication and policy implementation in health. So say you're like a physician and you're like, if we do this one thing, we can reduce this disease by like, 20%. You have to wait 10 years between when you publish the paper, not even start the study, to see it actually rolling out in clinics and schools or whatever. So that we have to close. These are places where, if the University of Toronto wants to talk about AI adoption, this is places where you can use AI strategically and safely and ethically to speed up data mobilization. And we need to do a much better job, because this is a speed game and we're being beat, right? It's like a Cold War and only one side showed up. So a lot of the new policy-driven and research-based stuff about, the AI and the internet and international kind of interference and democratic elections and societies are showing us like other people have AI too, and they're also using it to speed things up, but they're doing it, on a scale that's much more serious than we are. So this is an example of data poisoning, which is basically if you want to brainwash ChatGPT or another generative AI model, you can absolutely do it. They learn about the world through the internet. So all you need to do is use generative AI to set up like 100 websites that cast doubt about something, right? So say I want to start a campaign that says that Justin Trudeau, I don't know, what would be something funny that he could have done? Like, I'm blanking, but like, say that like Justin Trudeau had like, let's put it this way. Say Justin Trudeau had done something really bad and he'd been caught and he wanted to hire a firm to cover it up. You can absolutely do that today and basically change what generative AI would say about the case. This is the case actually with Donald Trump. His grandfather ran a brothel here in Canada, actually around the time of the Klondike Gold Rush. And if you go into generative AI right now, or you go into ChatGPT and you ask it, was Donald Trump's grandfather a pimp? It will bring up all of these like kind of obscure references that are like, no, he owned a hotel that had ladies on the second floor, but he wasn't really a pimp. But when you go into the legal records, it's like, well, no, he did actually. A lot of men made money that way around the time of the Klondike Gold Rush. So if he wanted to have, I'm not saying he did do this, he could have just set up a bunch of websites, paid someone to do it, that say, there's a lot of debate about this. Historians aren't sure. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
And then generative AI says, there's debate. Historians aren't sure. There's no actual historian that ever said that, but it doesn't matter, right? Because it can't discern between right and wrong. So this seeding of the internet with poisoned data is helping to basically create something that is more unreliable than what we had before. The Integrity Institute also recently released a new report about mapping foreign influence operations in the United States across online spaces. And they've also shown, they've suggested that there's also payments and support going to influencers here in North America. And I've seen that on a couple of different fronts. But it also can do this for government officials or former government officials, for academics, right? Things like that. So even the influencers that are coming from North America can also be shaped by this system. And this is a great report if you want to read more about it. So what can we do? I run boot camps for research-driven organizations, especially climate-based ones, to help them basically try to beat this system. The number one thing I always recommend is prioritizing visual platforms. So platforms like these, especially TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, are still considered to be not serious or kind of, questionable for academics. And they're also dangerous for academics, right? We get trolled on there. But the result is that this vacuum allows this huge group of other actors to come in and basically say what they want, relatively unchallenged. We know that more than 90% of Americans use social media as a news source, and increasingly, North Americans can't get away from generative AI content when it comes to things in the news, either because they can't find the news sites or because news sites are starting to use generative AI. And interestingly, what I learned from my first year students is that Instagram is still the biggest here in North America. TikTok is coming up strong at 39% in terms of favored platforms, and Twitter is basically gone for them. They're not really interested in that anymore. If you wanted to do something like this, if you had a great think tank and you're I want to get my information out there, you see a study, you're we got to get this out there, you can develop a great system with comms support, cross-posting from Pinterest, YouTube Shorts, Blue Sky, Substack, do a whole campaign, and you can hire graduate students to do it. And that is a really important work opportunity also for grad students. And it's important for us to do it because these are major centers of disinformation, bias, and lobbying that are also going undetected generally. So what we're seeing of the problem is really just the tip of the iceberg. And finally, also, it might look less serious, but remember the Hitler's radio equivalent, right? This is all about creating stuff that is visually compelling. And things that are visually compelling can compete with professionally crafted disinformation content as well. So what can algorithmic tools do? Well, these are, it's funny how much algorithms shape our lives these days. I'm sure you guys have talked about that a lot here. But these are, of course, top secret social media software that's basically used just to make more money, right? Reach more people, get more clicks, extend on the time you spend on the platforms. These are designed by psychologists or with psychologists. They're used to predict anything about your online behavior that could, provide them with useful information about you, including where you go, where you get your coffee, how long you stay there, and even posts that you don't click on, but you just slowly pause on, right? So the amount of data that they're collecting on people is really intense. And it's also used to automatically target and eliminate upsetting content or undesirable content. So these companies, and this was proven of TikTok in 2020 when they sank anything related to the protests around the death of George Floyd, was they basically put a ban on certain hashtags and just shadow banned the whole discussion. So unregulated companies having access to that kind of control is extremely dangerous. And I think any entity having that much information about any citizen is extremely dangerous. So sometimes academics, or at least some of the research-based organizations that I work with, It's not always shadow banning. Sometimes it's just like we haven't learned really good communication strategies. So sometimes with academic content, we tend to use upsetting images or quote unquote upsetting images in text, like sad faces or environmental destruction, things like that. It's not just that people don't want to know about that, it's that the platform will demote it because it might be categorized as depressing or upsetting, and it's not going to make someone want to buy like a pair of sweats. This is a market-driven platform, right? Posts with text that is too long or too complicated in academics, we're terrible for that. We got to do better. We have a lot to say, so learning to say things shortly is really helpful. Anything that's not timely or time sensitive or too long, stuff that doesn't have really quality videos, and virtue signaling, like staunch language, or if we mention things like a protected company. So say Procter & Gamble had like a big scandal around it, they could actually potentially play a platform to sync controversial content related to that could damage its brand. It could be like a tool like brand protection for these systems. So I'll show you like what this kind of focus on new approaches to like reaching much bigger audiences using algorithmic platforms can do. So this is the UN climate change account. And you can see here they've got a lot of followers. They've got close to 1 million followers. So a lot of people are like, I want to know, like I'm here, like I want to find something, I want to do something, I want to be active. But then when you actually look at the content on their page, this is on Instagram, it's really, really low views. So they're creating things that don't perform well on the algorithms or aren't very engaging for people. So this is what you would call a low investment model in social media outreach. It means that they probably got an unpaid intern to do that. They didn't really take it seriously. They were like, hey, somebody do the social media stuff. I don't know. And maybe they didn't get paid a lot, or it's just, one of many things they had to do. So they didn't invest much in it. And the result is that they were producing information that wasn't going anywhere. You can see about a few months later, same amount of followers, close to 1 million, but someone got into the driver's seat at UN Climate Change's Instagram account and started creating much stronger content. Stuff that was show, don't tell, not just like talking. Things that had illustrations, like funny little, turns on things like climate scientists read me tweets. So this is like this is an example of a higher investment model of public outreach, of digital public outreach. And you can see like it went through the roof, right? So investing in this kind of communications now has like an outsized beneficial impact. And so it's just my hope that, that this will happen. So what do we know and what do we do? Number one, I think the lessons of the Second World War teach us, that polarization, disinformation, and automated bias, these are existential crises, right? That is true, and never more so than in the algorithmic age, right? So if we can sort of start to reframe how we think about that, I think that this is essential in all conversations around algorithmic technologies, right? And as we see the decline of EDI kind of initiatives in the United States, like Canada needs to say, like, this is essential. This is at the heart of everything, right? This is our inheritance. Number two, we have to prioritize knowledge mobilization in trivial, marginal, and underengaged platforms that the public is at. We need to find people where they are, and we need to be of service, right, as a public institution of higher learning. And three, we can absolutely build critical algorithmic knowledge engagement and campaigns for scale and speed to turn this ship around. And the great thing about it, there's so many bonuses, is it serves the public. It looks great on a SHRC and NSERC application. It gives jobs to graduate students, and it gets your work out there. So that's it for me for today. I'm open to questions, and I also do boot camps for organizations. If you ever know of anyone that would like to, that's doing great work and they want to up their social presence, feel free to reach out. All right, thank you very much.